Now up is SBIR, STTR 101 panel expanding outside known networks.
Hey guys, we're ready to go.
Okay.
And you're live.
Good morning and welcome to the SBIR STTR 101 panel, where we will cover some of the basics of these programs as well as spend a little time on how to expand outside known networks. For those of you that are not familiar with the acronyms I just threw out, SBIR or SBIR stands for Small Business Innovation Research Program, and STTR or STTR stands for the Small Business Technology Transfer Program. Now that we've got that established, let me begin by introducing our panelists. First, my name is Mary Margaret Evans. I am the Executive Director of the APEX program. Our first panelist is Dr. Kate Gilpin. Kate is currently the Director of National Engagement at APEX, a partnership intermediary under the Parallax Advanced Research Corporation. She is also a commander in the Navy Reserves with 4 command tours and 15 years of leadership and management experience. Kate is a research scientist at heart with a passion for bridging the gap between academic research and government applications. In between her Navy tours, she has worked as a neuroscientist at the Air Force Research Laboratory and spent time as a postdoctoral fellow for the American Society for Engineering Education in the Materials Science and Technology branch of the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory. Kate has a PhD in neuroscience from the University of Maryland School of Medicine, a master's in national security and strategic studies from the Naval War College, and a bachelor's in psychobiology from the Rochester Institute of Technology. Welcome, Kate. Our second panelist is Scott Korndike. Scott is currently the president at the Entrepreneurs Center here in Miamisburg. Scott is an accomplished executive with responsibilities spanning functional areas that include strategy, marketing, operations, and human resources in both large and small companies. With more than 18 years of experience, Scott has worked in multiple industries, including legal publishing, online and direct marketing, technology commercialization, and venture capital. During the course of his career, he's been the president of Sector Light Consulting, vice president and chief operating officer at the Dayton Development Coalition, vice president and general manager at BRC Marketing, and senior director for preference markets and director of business development at LexisNexis. Scott has a JD from the University of Dayton School of Law with a concentration in intellectual property and a bachelor's in biochemistry from Hope College. Welcome, Scott. So I'd like to start our panel discussion today by asking Kate and Scott to each take a few minutes and describe their current roles for our viewers. Scott, why don't we start with you?
Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, Mary Margaret, and thank you, WBI, for hosting Impact Week. So I'm Scott Korndike, president of the Entrepreneur Center. The Entrepreneur Center is a commercialization center, as you rightly said, here in the Dayton region. We focus on businesses across the spectrum. So we focus on small businesses that are just starting non-technology businesses, and we've got about 450 of those in our portfolio. And we focus on programming for businesses that are developing technologies. We have about 125 companies in our portfolio. And the way we support those companies is through programming from kind of the beginning of their company, corporate formation, to venture development, business development, all the way up to raising money for investment and growth and scaling. I've also had the good fortune to partner with the U.S. Air Force and the Air Force Research Laboratories and run a program called SBIR TAP, the Small Business Innovative Research Technology Acceleration Program. That's a mouthful, a big, long way of saying we provide training to small businesses that have received SBIR grants from the Air Force, really help them think about commercialization very early in their commercialization journey.
All right, Kate, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Mary Margaret. Yes, I'm really happy to be here to be talking with everybody today. And thanks again to the Wright Brothers Institute for hosting this. I am Kate Gilpin. I am the Outreach Director for APEX, which is a program under Parallax Advanced Research. And our primary goal is to help bridge the gap between the universities that have really great technology being developed within their labs and the small businesses that are able to commercialize that technology, and then linking that partnership up with a stakeholder in the government that hopefully has a need for that technology. And so APEX does that through a series of matchmaking and process navigation events primarily. I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk about that in a little greater detail as the webinar goes on.
All right. Thank you both. Okay, first question. Could you explain for our audience today what the key differences are between the SBIR and STTR programs?
So, I know Kate agrees kind of with this perspective. It's actually fairly straightforward when you think about it. So this SBIR program, the Small Business Innovative Research Program, is really focused on small businesses who are trying to commercialize the technology. So the focus is the small business. The STTR program still focuses on small business, but those small businesses have to have a partnership with a research institute, college, university, research institute. So in both the SBIR and the STTR cases, you're talking about a for-profit business. In the case of SBIR, just the business is going after support from the government. In the case of an STTR, it's a business partnered with a research institute. And in the case of the STTR program, the focus is really on that small business licensing technology from the research institute and creating alignment and partnership with the federal government through one of its agencies that deploy the SBIR or the STTR program. Now, there are other nuances, but at kind of a threshold level, that's really the primary difference.
Kate, anything you'd like to add?
No, I think Scott did a really great job. There are, some other small differences, but I think they can vary actually from each round of proposals. And so it's really best to, of course, read the call for proposals to make sure that you really understand it correctly. And there are some resources on the SBIR.gov website that will have different frequently asked questions about what the difference is. And so you could always look there as well.
All right. So talking about STTR, who typically leverages these STTR partnerships?
Yeah, I think that the STTR is a really good way for small businesses to find a research institution partner for capabilities that exist within a university or a college or a research institution that don't exist most often in small businesses. And so we've seen small businesses reach out to research institutions for primarily three things. One is pieces of equipment that the small business does not have, things like wind tunnels if they're researching aerodynamics, or if they are on the biomedical side of things like an X-ray crystallography machine or things like that a small business does not have access to, but really are a college or a university's bread and butter, right, for a research institution. So that's one way that we see small businesses reach out to research institutes. But another way is the fact that universities have a capability of doing really high throughput testing that, again, small businesses just don't have. So if they have a prototype that they want to get tested, the university researchers have the capability to do that testing much faster than a small business would. And then the last reason that we see small businesses most frequently reach out to a research institution is to get an answer to a theoretical problem faster than the small business would be able to do it, because the university and the research institution houses people with PhDs who focus on one really, really narrow topic. And they know that topic extremely well. So they would be able to answer a theoretical question much, much faster than a small business would. The small business probably would be able to do it, but it might take them a year, a month, whereas the PhD at the research institution would be able to do it in a day or a week. And so really, to sum it up, we find that the small business reaches out to the research institution to get things done faster, because the research institution is very good at a certain subset of things that the small business would just take a little bit longer for the small business to do.
Do you ever see the academic institutions doing the reverse, reaching out to industry for STTR?
Yes, definitely. Great question. Yes, thank you. Yes, we find that there is a lot of technology being developed in the universities, and it is really great technology. But then sometimes that technology is left on the bench because they don't have the time, or they don't have money, or they don't have the inclination to commercialize that technology. And so they'll reach out to the small business who does have the time and the money and the inclination to commercialize that technology. So it really is a really useful partnership both ways.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Can you provide us with some examples of when SBIR is the right way to go, and also, or versus the STTR? How do you make the decision?
So I think, it goes back to our first response. If you are a small business that is not associated with or looking to license a technology from a research institute, if you've developed your own technology, then you're going to go down the SBIR path. You're going to look at the requirements. And we're going to talk about this, I know, in our conversation, but you're going to look at the requirements, you're going to look at the solicitations, and you're ultimately going to go down that path. So a good example, small business has got a technology that it thinks can improve a mission set or provide value to, let's say, the Air Force. They look at the Air Force solicitations, they enter a solicitation, and ultimately kind of enter that SBIR pipeline. They're not looking to license a technology. As Kate said, they're not necessarily of need for some of the theoretical work or some of the work that universities are so good at doing. They've got kind of a baked technology they've developed. That's SBIR. On the other hand, if you have a company that needs help, as Kate rightly said, or has got a piece of work that a university is particularly attuned to, and they're looking to partner with that university for purposes of licensing a technology, then STTR is the right path. I'll make just one quick point about SBIRs. There's kind of two flavors of them, not from a program perspective, but in terms of how these SBIR dollars are used. One flavor is the small business has a technology that they're moving into the Air Force, for example, and the dollars are going to go to really perfect that technology, kind of a traditional use of SBIR. On the other hand, there are companies that have very mature products that when they enter a defense market, they need to tweak that product to align with a particular defense mission. So the technology is pretty well baked, but it's not perfectly aligned with a defense mission. Well, that's another great use of SBIR funding. So as a small business, whether you've got a technology that needs development or you've got a technology that is well developed but needs to be customized or tailored to the military use, SBIR is the right kind of contract.
Kate, anything to add there?
Yeah, I'll just add one small fact that sometimes you can go from an SBIR in phase 1 to an STTR in phase 2. And so oftentimes a small business would see the need to do an SBIR first to, like Scott said, to kind of finalize their idea or their prototype or their project, and just get it ready for when the research institution would then become involved for phase 2. So that's just one more way why sometimes companies would want an SBIR first and then maybe eventually switch over to STTR.
Okay. All right. Okay, now I'm a university or I'm a company, and I now have learned about the fact that there are SBIR and STTR programs. Where do I start? How do I prepare? What do I do first? Scott?
So that's such a great question. And I'm going to say in response to it, in some ways, it's easier now to get started than ever before. and I'm thinking specifically of the Air Force and the AFWERX program. It used to be historically that the Air Force, for example, and this is true of the Navy and the Army and other services, other agencies, they would publish solicitations, and the solicitations would be pretty specific as to what they were looking for. So obviously my knee-jerk reaction to your question is take a look at the solicitations, see what the government is interested in. The Air Force and the AFWERX program has sort of flipped that on its head a little bit, and they're asking companies to enter what are called open topics. They're topics that don't necessarily have specificity. The companies are able to kind of speak to what they're capable of doing in alignment with the Air Force. So the first thing I would still say is research your customer, customer being the agency that you're going to ultimately seek an SBIR grant for. And I will tell you, or a research contract with, I will tell you, when you research the Air Force, for example, or the Navy, when we say that, when we say research the customer, what we really mean is understand who's going to deploy your product, understand who's going to adopt your product, put in the work to understand that agency or that DoD entity, understand the mission set that you're trying to meet, understand the organizations that care about that mission. Once you've got a good sense of what that mission set looks like and how your technology aligns with those needs, then obviously understand the solicitation. Even the open topics from AFWERX or all the other services, there are very specific solicitation instructions with deadlines and requirements. Make sure that you fully align with those requirements. Make sure you fully align with those timelines. Make sure that you take advantage, as Kate said, of all of the supportive information on SBIR.gov, on the Air Force's SBIR site. Make sure you do your research. In some ways, the lightest lift you're going to have is communicating what you do and how you do it, your own technology. Your heavier lift is really understanding who that customer is and making sure that you're speaking that customer's language.
All right, good points. Kate, anything to add?
Yeah, I cannot agree more. Scott and I are thinking alike this morning because I was going to say very similar ideas. Yes, you must read the solicitation, of course, that's first and foremost. But now actually is the perfect time to get started. So, so WBI's Impact Week is perfectly timed because the next round of solicitations is supposed to be pre-released next week on 24 November. So this is a great time to get all of the information you need, you know, kind of do use this week to learn as much as you can about the different programs. And then next week, when the pre-release comes out, you'll be able to read all those topics that Scott was talking about. You'll be able to see all of the details because the solicitations are quite detailed, and it's very important that you know all of those details. So so you can read that next week, and then even over the upcoming holidays, if you have some downtime, you could always read them as well, because it's going to open in January. And even if it's kind of a tight turnaround for you and your specific research project, that's totally fine. These opportunities come every 3 to 4 months. So if you can't make it for this round, definitely read the solicitation, learn about it, pick up some pointers along the way, and then you'll be just all that much more set for the following round. And then if you are able to do it for this round, now is the time to do some things that take a while. If you want to be able to make that deadline, which is you have to register in SAM, which is the System for Award Management. You have to make sure that you have a DUNS number. You have to think about what you might need from the partner. If you're going to do an STTR and you want to involve a research institution, you have to think about what you would ask them to do. So there are some prep work or some prep steps you can do right now before the next call for proposals is even open.
Okay, thank you both. Okay, so recently the Air Force has really opened the aperture on what they call non-traditional partnerships, or partnerships with universities and businesses that have typically not done business with the government in the past. So now we want to spend a little time talking about how SBIR and STTR mechanisms facilitate the government's desire to reach out to non-traditionals. So starting with STTR, Kate, how are STTR universities invited to the table?
Yeah, the Air Force as a whole, and really the entire Department of Defense, is really focusing on universities. But to get back to the Air Force specifically, AFOSR, which is the Air Force Office of Scientific Research, thinks very, very highly of universities. And they see universities as the backbone of technology development in the United States. And going forward for the next decade or so, the Air Force and again all of the services have different technology needs that they have a strong desire for over the next decade, and they see this as coming from the universities. So if you are a university, now is a perfect time to get involved because you're exactly who the government is looking for. And I mentioned before some of the reasons why small businesses would want to partner with an STTR university or partner with a university through an STTR award. And so I think that's certainly a very inviting way for the universities to come to the table is being asked by the small company to come to the table. That would certainly be a great invitation for the university. And all of the universities are open to this type of award. It's not just the big R1 and R2 universities or those big name schools that everybody's heard of many, many times. It can be a small liberal arts college. It can be HBCUs. It can be tribal colleges. It can be agricultural schools. All of these really good universities and schools that maybe don't have as much research funding as a big R1 and R2 university, but still has a really great capability to partner with a small business for an STTR. So nobody's off the table, and everybody should feel very welcomed and invited to participate.
Great, thank you. Turning now to SBIR, what kind of programs exist for companies who want to find out if the SBIR is right for them?
Yeah, so Kate mentioned a couple of really important resources. So SBIR.gov, clearly, you're going to want to understand what the contours of the SBIR program are and how they kind of orient themselves across the various agencies in the federal government. When you think about the Air Force specifically, an outstanding resource, AF, SBIR, STTR.af.mil. Just Google search the Air Force's SBIR site. Tremendous assets and resources there, talking, as Kate said, about the timelines, talking about the requirements. I would also add the Air Force Small Biz site. So the Air Force Small Business Office is very active in trying to provide clarity around how small businesses can engage with the Air Force. And so you'll find some helpful information there. Probably the biggest way that companies kick the tires a little bit and test the waters is participating in a roadshow. So if you look at SBIRroadtour.com, you'll see now it's got 2020 dates, but they'll be updated for 2021. There are these road shows that are put on by the SBA that let people interact with and understand the SBIR program. So those are all the kind of web resources that you can typically take a look at. The other thing I would say is it has never been easier to participate in the SBIR program in the sense that, as we said, the government really has, the Air Force has really opened the aperture. They are just really diligently looking for new partnerships. So SBIR companies really shouldn't study the opportunity. They should pursue the opportunity, right? The easiest way to get involved and see if it's right for you is apply. Find a solicitation that makes some sense. Take a technology that you think has resonance with the Air Force, for example, and put it through a process. The Air Force has done a really remarkable job in some ways kind of lowering the barrier to entry. You're talking about pitch decks now. You're talking about very short documents that kind of start that evaluation. So the bar is not very high, and that's intentional. So I would say, if you want to find out if the SBIR program is right for you, give it a try. Give it a try. You're not going to burn a huge amount of time And the Air Force specifically is very interested in having a conversation with non-traditional people who haven't tried the SBIR program before.
All right. And so building on that comment about non-traditional, maybe both of you could take some time and describe some untapped regions, markets, technologies that you think would provide value to the Air Force. Again, this is all through the SBIR lens.
Sure, I'll jump in here to talk about from the STTR perspective. So talking about universities and their research institutions. I think that California is actually one of the untapped regions, and some people might think that's a little bit odd because California has Silicon Valley, and it's well known for its tech development capabilities, but it hasn't partnered with the government as much as some other regions have. And it has a high concentration of some of the top research institutions for DoD priorities, like I was mentioning earlier, specifically microelectronics and directed energy. So those are two topics that the Air Force is very interested in going forward from now until 2030. And so California has a lot of those research institutions and programs that are being developed to meet those needs. I also think that the Northeast is a relatively untapped area since there aren't a lot of Air Force bases up there, and historically we see a lot of activity around where the bases are located. That would be true for any of the services. There aren't a lot of Air Force bases in the Northeast, but there are a really high concentration of top-notch universities. So I think that could definitely be a source of a lot of productive partnerships as well. And I think that's probably, that's it for me.
Okay. All right, Scott.
Yeah, I agree with every bit of that. I would say, and this is going to seem kind of like a obvious answer and kind of an answer contrary to the question. So you asked for untapped regions or markets. So an untapped market, these are markets that a lot of people understand, but because of the explosion in commercial interest and commercial technology development, I think there are really three market spaces that I see having real value to the Air Force moving forward. And I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to tell you that for the last 2 months, we've been running some programs for the Air Force. So we've got some insight into some of the awards that have been made. And it's pretty clear that these are areas of interest to the Air Force, but there's really three market sectors. First is autonomous systems. The Air Force cares obviously a great deal about autonomous systems. You don't have to look very far to see most people would argue that it's the future of flight, maybe the future of combat, right? So autonomous systems. Why? Because so many small businesses are getting into the autonomous system space, whether it's airframes, navigation, package delivery, sensor systems, swarming of drones. So autonomous systems, I think, is an area that is rich for SBIR companies. The second, I would say, is battery and power related companies. Clearly, the ubiquity of devices, all requiring power. So battery and power, whether you can store battery, whether you can store power. Can you build conformal batteries? Can you build batteries that go into clothing, go into devices, go into structures? How do you discharge batteries? How do you transport power? How do you manage power circuitry so that as you switch power sources, what happens to those power spikes? What do they do to equipment? So battery and power is, I think, an area rich with opportunity. And then the final one I would say, and it's general, but I think it's general intentionally, is human performance. How can you marry the power of a person, a human, with a machine or with a system? How can you maximize performance, whether it's a wearable sensor, whether it's learning algorithms, whether it's artificial intelligence, augmented reality? That's an area that is very clearly a hot area commercially. So there's a tremendous amount of commercial interest in it. And at the same time, a tremendous desire to adopt and integrate those technologies into our DoD and in the Air Force. So autonomous systems, battery and power, and human performance. If you're a small business in that space, I strongly advise you, strongly recommend that you pursue SBIR opportunities.
I would add to the panelists' comments. The Department of Defense typically puts out its desired technologies list. It's informal, but they have thrusts always. And the current administration has identified 10, and they are things like hypersonics, microelectronics, cyber, and others. And many of these are very, high level, very broad. And while the new administration may change the emphasis, many of these will stay on the list of things that they're really interested in. So as Scott said earlier, do your homework, find out what the department is really interested in, what it needs. And you'll find that many of these cross services, it isn't just the Air Force that wants microelectronics, they all do. So do your homework, and I think you'll find, as the DoD says, it's a target-rich environment. There are many things they are looking for. So with that, let's talk about networks. Known networks are usually things that people rely on to grow their research or technology. But let's say we want to expand, our network. For my organization, our organizations, how do we go about doing that? How are you getting new groups to engage? Kate, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. The first thing I would say is there are a lot of helping organizations out there that can help connect you to different people who you don't have a connection with right now. So I would say, to find your favorite helping organization and reach out. That could be me at Apex or Scott, or other PIAs, the partnership intermediary agreements with the different services. So definitely, do some research online, or reach out to one of us and we can point you in the right direction. Apex specifically does a matchmaking process, which has been very well received by the people we've helped make connections to. And our goal is always to create the most high-performing team possible. So we ask the universities and the companies that we know want to be a part of the Air Force ecosystem. We'll ask them what technology they bring to the table and then what technology or skill set they're looking for in their partner. And we're able to make a solid connection between two different entities that where we can help them fill in each other. So we found that to be quite successful for the past 2 rounds of SBIR proposals, and we're going to keep doing that as well. So this is one way where you could be exposed to a much larger network than you currently have right now, and it is really all about who you know. That is a huge part of being successful in the SBIR process. And there are a lot of different organizations that can help you, one of which is Apex, and we can help you with matchmaking.
All right, Scott?
Yeah, I think that's perfectly said. I agree 100% with Kate. Start with organizations that are dedicated to providing support. So Apex, the Entrepreneur Center, Wright Brothers Institute. There are partnership intermediary organizations across the country, typically surrounding the various installations. And so reach out to a partnership intermediary organization. Reach out to organizations who exist to support small businesses. No matter where the viewers are watching from, every one of you has access to a small business development center, an SBDC. They're nationally established. They're around the country. SBDCs exist to support you, and they exist to support that connection and opening your networks up. So first and foremost, rely heavily on those organizations who are obligated because of what we love to do every day to help you. Second thing I would say is we have certainly tried to push organizations to engage each other. So it's a source of public information. You can see people who've won SBIR awards. You can see them nationally and you can see them locally. We've certainly encouraged people to rely heavily on each other. Rely on call a small business in your hometown that's got an SBIR and talk to them about that process. We've not seen in our experience with 400 or 500 SBIR companies nationwide, we've never seen a circumstance where a company has said, yeah, no, I'm not going to help you. Small businesses support each other. And so reach out to those small businesses that have gone down SBIR pathways. understand the challenges, but also the opportunity. LinkedIn, strangely enough, LinkedIn is a tremendous way to create those relationships. I couldn't agree more with Kate. If you don't have the relationship, it's kind of hard to understand and break in. So form those relationships. LinkedIn is a tool that's supposed to do that. So rely on organizations like us, rely on your peer set, rely on tools like LinkedIn to find people who are active in the SBIR space and learn and take advantage of the opportunity.
So we mentioned earlier that there's a regular pattern of releases, 3 a year typically, but recently the Air Force has been doing some off-cycle releases as well. The most recent in late summer around Agility Prime. Can you say a word or two about that?
Kate, you want to take that question?
Yeah, well, I'm going to use your words. I really liked when you said don't study the opportunity, pursue it. And so these are perfect opportunities for you to try, right? Nothing bad is going to happen if you don't get the award, but you're going to get a wealth of knowledge and experience and process know-how just from going through the process one time. The people who have gone through the process one time are light years ahead of people who have never done it. It is a daunting process, and that's where you can reach out to these helping organizations who can help you through that first time process, even the second and third time as well, because things are constantly changing. But that's what I would say. And I would also add that the Air Force has repeatedly said they're willing to take a lot of risk for Phase 1 awards. Mm-hmm. They understand that not every Phase 1 award is going to work out. They understand that the projects, sometimes fail, and they are okay with that. They are willing to accept that risk because they understand that funding a lot of really good ideas is where that new technology, that brand new technology that will help the United States maintain its competitive advantage comes from, is by funding a lot of good opportunities and good ideas. And maybe not all of them work out, but that's a risk that the Air Force has said repeatedly that they're willing to take. So I would encourage everybody to try. One simple word, try.
All right. Well said. Anything to add there, Scott?
No, perfectly said.
Okay. So for both of you, I know you often reach out to new participants or partners that are totally unfamiliar with the defense market. What are their initial reactions?
So I think that, look, in truth, the initial reaction is that process, it's a government process, therefore it's going to be slow and it's going to be cumbersome. And my small business is going to be tied up in, things moving at the pace of government as opposed to the pace of business. I'm not really interested, right? I think that's the challenge that Kate and I face as we reach out to small businesses. And what I would say to them unequivocally, and we've been saying it for a couple of years certainly now, is you're just wrong. It is not a daunting process. The Air Force specifically deserves a great deal of credit for the way that is really progressively thought about engaging small businesses. And so if you think it's hard, and if you think it's cumbersome, and if you think the process is too slow, you're just wrong. And you need to educate yourself, right? And we've talked about some of those places to educate yourself. But I just go back to what I said earlier. It's kind of an excuse, frankly. Don't study and think too much. Just go and try it. And if you conclude after trying it that it's not worth your time, that's fair. I have no problem with that. But if you conclude that it's a government process, therefore it's too slow, it's wrong for me, you're missing out on a hugely important source of non-dilutive capital. You're missing out on a hugely important market. And frankly, you're making it harder on yourself as a small business. So go back to what Kate and I both said. Don't talk about it, just do it. Take a shot and you will be pleasantly surprised.
Kate, anything to add?
Yes, I'll just add one thing from the perspective of a university. Universities are very well versed in applying for NSF grants or NIH grants, right? Those are the two main funding sources for a lot of university researchers. And the SBIR, STTR process is a government process, but it is a lot easier than the NSF or NIH process. And it is, while it is still a competitive process, it is not nearly as competitive as NIH. I mean, the NIH win rate is pretty dismal. And the SBIR, STTR win rate, and I'm specifically talking about AFWorks now, is much higher. I think the last round was something like 75%. So, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves.
All right. At this point, we only have a couple minutes left. Maybe I'll turn to the both of you for a few closing remarks. If you were going to sum up what you want folks to know in our SBIR STTR 101 panel, what would that be? Kate, I'll start with you.
Okay, I would want them to know that the STTR and the SBIR process is an accessible process to everybody, that the open topic for AFWorks and the Air Force SBIR process is very unique and something that people should take advantage of. So and it really levels the playing field. Now everybody can participate. You don't have to necessarily be doing research in some kind of engineering field, or you don't have to be doing microelectronics. You can have a good idea that doesn't fit one of those 10 topics that Mary Margaret was mentioning earlier, and apply under an open topic and convince the Air Force that they need this technology. And then the second thing I would want people to know is reach out. Reach out to me, reach out to Scott, reach out to any of the other organizations that have been mentioned throughout this panel, but also just, I mean, a quick Google search will get you a lengthy list as well. Reach out and let us help you.
All right, thank you. And Scott?
Yeah, agree with every bit of that. I would say that the SBIR process and the SBIR kind of environment is well understood. So there's a number of resources, get out your favorite search engine and consume the resources that are available to you. Certainly reach out to the folks that want to be helpful. I would say to small businesses that are thinking about the SBIR process, I touched on it earlier, the world is changing pretty quickly, and increasingly venture capital sources, investment sources are looking at companies that have utilized SBIR funding very differently than they have historically. There's always been a concern among venture capital organizations that companies that use SBIR funding do research, and they're not really focused on profitable businesses, scalable businesses, they're focused on research. Well, that has really started to change. I think it started to change because the economic calculus of developing a profitable and a thriving business is you need resource. And if you can align your small business with a government customer, and that government customer through the SBIR program is willing to pay for the development of that technology, that's a win-win for everybody. And then downstream investors, instead of putting their money into that development, reap the benefit of the earlier investment by the federal government. The government reaps the benefit of the technology, the investor reaps the benefit of a much more mature company. That calculus has started to make a lot more sense for venture organizations. And in fact, there's venture organizations now that are focused on companies that have utilized SBIR funding to move forward. So it's no longer that this is a secondary way to kind of fund your company. Increasingly, this is a brilliant way to fund your company. So definitely, as Kate said, find those people that can help, enter an open topic, put your product into those cycles, see if there's interest among those parties that you've done the research on, and just go and do it. It's a very, very smart, sophisticated way to develop an organization and develop a product or a service.
Can you, before we close, can you say a bit more about the services under SBIR? We've talked about submitting technologies, but not service.
Yeah, so I can speak just briefly to kind of 2 points. The first is that service begins with the agencies themselves, and I can tell you I think next on the agenda is Ms. Anissa Lumpkin. You just don't find better people who are more service oriented than the Air Force SBIR, STTR organization. So they are going to serve you in the sense that they are there to answer questions. They are aligned with your interests. They genuinely want to help people be successful. So that's sort of the first level of services that I would kind of lay out. The second level is services that the Air Force makes available. And so I mentioned it earlier, the Entrepreneur Center runs a SBIR TAP program. We run cohorts of companies that have received SBIR grants, and we teach them sort of fundamental commercialization skills, how you think about customers, how you think about markets. We run those regularly. We'll be starting some cohorts after the first of the year. So there are services and support structures that the Air Force provides to small businesses that have received SBIRs.
All right. And with that, I think our time is about up. So I want to thank you both, Kate Gilpin from Apex and Scott Korndike from the Entrepreneur Center. Thank you very much. And to our viewers, I hope this has been helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.